Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome. My name is Jason Starr. I'm with Talentis. I'm your host today, but the brains of the outfit, the person you're all here to listen to, is my colleague and friend, Tom Crowfoot, who I will be introducing to you all momentarily. Tom is the person that's going to be sharing his wisdom with you over the duration of our call. Tom is someone who has been in and around the executive search industry for much longer than his photo would suggest is possible. I've known him for probably 20 odd years. During that time, he's worked with search firms, some of the biggest global search firms in the world, along with a number of boutique search firms. And he's worked in competitor intelligence roles, operations roles, research roles, execution roles. So he really knows the search industry inside out. However, at the moment, Tom's time is primarily focused on Digby Edwards, which is well, Tom, why don't you tell us a bit what you're doing with your Digby Edwards hat on? Explain your knowledge and what it is you do for your search firm clients.
Sure, thank you, Jason. So Digby Edwards was originally founded just over 12 and a half years ago. Essentially, what we do is provide operational support for search firms and other smallish businesses. The operational support really kind of focuses in on all areas that I've covered throughout my career. So really a mixture of research, operations, so IT, marketing, and general operational efficiency work. There's a strong kind of inner geek in there as well, so it's quite techie orientated, but it's also one that is very kind of grounded, as I say, within the exec search market and so on. So yeah, I mean that's Digby Edwards, really with that in mind, I think as Jason mentioned, we had a small survey we popped out pre-Christmas, and we'll be talking about the quite good results that came back from that. And they covered a number of areas from market outlook, kind of benchmarks, and how folk have been kind of navigating what can best be described as a relatively turgid market in the last couple of years. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time just looking at various different engagement strategies, future challenges, and so on. So the slides themselves, I'll be whizzing through relatively quickly. But as with all good research, just to give you an initial flavour for the kind of demographic overview of the results we had. The vast majority of our respondents were based in Europe, around about 43%. A good showing from the Americas, Asia Pacific, and the UK, and a little less so in Australia. But most importantly, our target audience were search firms, so they are retained. It's about 71% were either mostly or fully retained, and only a small proportion were what we would classify as always contingent. But that said, they were utilising search methodologies to conduct their business. So really with that in mind, the kind of geographical remit of each of the firms was very kind of regional orientated. There were quite a lot of global firms based out of the US, and obviously Europe. A lot of the firms there, both in Europe and in the UK, tended to have a global remit, but in reality were perhaps a little bit more kind of local market or local regional focused.
And I know that's one of the areas we'll be looking at later on in terms of how people running businesses are looking outside of their own industries of their own countries to try to generate additional revenue streams. So the first question we asked people was about the outlook. So we've just done a quick poll a moment ago, but we did a more structured poll pre-Christmas. So Tom, perhaps you can talk us through what we found out here.
Sure. I mean, by and large, most firms, both large and small, I think as I alluded to earlier, been through a pretty tricky time since the pandemic. we've been living in a world where there's quite a lot of false dawns. It'll get better next quarter, and I don't think that's just necessarily consultant speak. I think people genuinely believe, there are upticks coming along. But that said, there've always been some fairly good excuses kicking around for why those quarters, why those half years haven't really quite taken place. But that said, when we look at the results of our poll, nobody was very pessimistic, which is obviously good to see. I think also what we also saw was that from a regional perspective, a lot of folk certainly felt that H2 was going to be a lot stronger than the first sort of few months of the first half of the year. That may be because we're operating in a search rather than a recruitment market, and therefore lead times are a little bit longer. But interestingly, and I'll come on to this a little later on, we have seen quite a few businesses actually look quite closely at their geographies that they cover. I've got clients who at the moment are looking to break out into the US, really working on the principle that they view the US market to be potentially a little better poised for the future, and so on. So, people are starting to react to these geographies, in their own fashion.
One of the sorry, Tom, please go on.
Yeah. No.
I was just going to make the point that obviously, again, this poll is up to date. It was all taken, I think, in sort of November, December. But if you then put on top of it that based on the audience today, the slightly larger majority, as I recall, are positive and finding that January is actually better than expected, hopefully you can build that as an extra layer of confidence on top of the data we're looking at here.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Good.
Good. And I think what was quite interesting is when we look at it by operating model, the more retained orientated search firms tended to be a lot more optimistic. Potentially that's down to the strength of their relationships, and that being able to combat what is actually quite a tough market to operate in terms of competition and so on. But the market itself, it's going to remain challenging. There are certain sectors that are slightly better in demand, but there are also ones that are a little bit weaker. I think to some extent, when we look at the in-demand sectors, there probably aren't really many surprises there. It's tech, it's life sciences, it's energy, but certainly from an energy perspective, it's perhaps a little bit more shifting towards the renewables market. Certainly, whilst not in this particular poll, the Middle East is certainly broadening a lot of their traditional biases. So, if we were looking at one or two of the major oil producing countries, a lot of them are starting to switch to renewables and so on. And, those markets are growing quite substantially. But we're also seeing, fairly solid demand across banking, financial services, insurance, telecoms, and as I mentioned earlier, the healthcare side as well. The slightly weaker sectors, on the other hand, there's a little bit more of a mixed bag in here, but they do tend to have been the industries that are first movers or first key reactors. So, in a downturn, they will tend to be the little bit more cutthroat industries in terms of culling people, and obviously, bringing them back in when the market bounces back. The other area that's fairly dampened down, I think is probably the nicest way of putting it, is the more consumer-orientated businesses, mainly due to the squeeze in the cost of living. But I think when we look at those, there's a couple of kind of takeaways. One, search firms do need to diversify in order to kind of stabilize their business. A lot of businesses, especially the smaller ones, will operate a very close and tight niche. But that said, when you look at it, those niches do tend to expand in a client's mind. So if you take a look at where the demand for cross-industry hires come in, a recent LinkedIn survey stated that 1 in 3 hires are starting to come from a different industry to what the client is operating in. The tech industry itself is very, very hot on that. Healthcare has seen about a 15% increase in hiring professionals from non-healthcare backgrounds. And financial services firm, again, they've reported around about a 20% rise in hiring candidates from non-financial services sectors. Admittedly, a lot of that is in certain roles. So for the FS side, it's more data analysis and digital transformation and so on. But the kind of sorry.
Okay, so we lost you.
All right. Some of the takeaways we can see is when you look at some of the conflicting data on how the global search market is growing, we can see some fairly kind of wild projections. With compound annual growth rate at 10%, others saying it's about 5%. The size of the industry is about 6 billion compared to 40 billion, and so on. So, certainly with that in mind, one thing we can guarantee is nobody's quite got a very good handle on the market itself. The things we can quite definitely see are, one, there's quite a lot of uncertainty around. Last year, some in the region of about 2 billion plus people headed to the polls, for elections in the US, UK, India, Mexico, South Africa, and so on. And I think also, this is not my own particular kind of way of putting it, but I thought it sums it up quite well. Was a recent report by the staffing industry, I think literally about 2 or 3 days ago, described the recovery as basically a lazy W recovery. So, we typically see a bounce back, but what we are seeing in this particular phase of bounce back is a very elongated, slow kind of trudge, but it's definitely on its way back. So yeah, I mean, those were our kind of takeaways from the survey with regards to the overall outlook.
Brilliant. So we move on from sort of the out. Sorry, Tom, am I interrupting you? Apologies.
No.
No? Okay, so what we wanted to do with the outlook was get people a sense of where people are. What we want to do now is say, okay, well, what are the benchmarks? What are search firms doing at the moment? What are they doing normally? And what should other search firms be comparing themselves to? So we've got a host of data on that. And again, Tom, I'm going to ask you just to talk us through some of the key data points and go for it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So, yeah, a lot of the key data points we looked at were indicators that were non-financial. So we looked at the quantity of assignments. So how many assignments does a single consultant expect to complete in a year? They do vary quite a bit, but essentially it's about it works roughly about 1 per month to close. But obviously that will depend a little bit upon deal size and so on. But the spread is there is a spread there. If you look at the European market, our kind of maximum expectation was about 30 searches a year, which we could potentially put down as a little bit of an anomaly. But we could also put it down to quite an influx of what I classify as quasi-search methodologies. So it's a slightly kind of cut down version of search, but definitely using a a search mentality to actually, complete the assignments and so on. If we look at it by operating model, there isn't a huge amount of difference between the different operating models. Whilst I've kept the anomalies in there, with the 50-50 retained versus contingent suddenly spiking out, again, not a huge amount of difference.
Before we move on, if I can just
yeah.
put you on the spot, because I don't think we've got a survey piece on this, Tom, but in your experience, are we seeing assignments taking longer? So is the time to shortlist, the time to placement longer than it has been? Is that something that is changing with the market? Is that something that you have a view on how it might go in coming months?
I mean, certainly what I've seen, time to shortlist and everything else. So the bit where search firms potentially have the most influence is tending to shorten a little bit. So people are getting a little bit more efficient. They're very conscious of clients waiting, hanging around to be able to interview and so on. Where the kind of stretch comes out quite considerably is actually over the client's commitment to hire X or Y. And actually, a lot of those final decisions are slightly based on a nervous commitment from clients, not so much in the individuals that are being put forward, but more along the lines of, are we actually doing the right thing here? Should we be hiring this particular role? And certainly, I've seen over the last sort of 18 months or so, quite a stretch out on that side. So I think we're getting better. We need to be able to encourage our clients to, commit towards the back end of the process.
I think anecdotally from some of the clients I've spoken to, there seems to be, as you might imagine, a challenge with candidates as well at the moment, in that a candidate that's ensconced in employment in company A is a bit nervous about potentially making a move, given everything else that's going on in the world. Is that something that you think is also a factor?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's definitely an element of better the devil you know with a lot of candidates. But yeah, and I think it's one of those things where we all recognise that actually a lot of the factors that are bearing upon companies and their success are beyond that individual company's control. So it's economic, it's geopolitical, and so on.
Absolutely. It's always under our control when it's successful, but when it's all going horribly wrong, it's always out of our control. That's my experience. That's what I tell my board. Okay. Let's talk about getting up to speed. What we do when we start hiring.
Yeah, getting up to speed. So we used as a benchmark basically how long does it take for a consultant to cover their costs. On a region-to-region basis, I would argue that there's not necessarily a huge amount of difference, although Australia versus Europe is obviously, there's a good nigh on 6 months difference there. But where it really comes into play is, for want of a better phrase, how fully retained you are. So, if you're looking at a kind of 50-50, a little bit of a mix, we're probably looking around 5, 6, 7 months or so to get a consultant to, build enough to cover their costs. When it comes to retain model, we obviously are dealing potentially with slightly chunkier fees, and a slightly more of a deliberate kind of search process. So that does crop up into the best part of the year to get someone on board. Which obviously, when it comes to trying to grow your search business, those are quite definite factors to take into consideration. What we can do is look at the predictors in the short term, and I think to some extent, probably no real surprises here. It's about volume and noise in the market. So it's number of client meetings. Quite interestingly, quite a lot of client satisfaction work as well. But actually, when you look at which we'll show you a little bit later on, where the business comes from, a lot of it is kind of repeat business, referrals, and so on, and therefore client satisfaction at an early stage of someone doing a good job is actually, quite a good solid predictor as well. I think to some extent there's probably a little bit of a leaf we can take from the more contingent recruitment community in around activity. Obviously, stylistically, that doesn't necessarily rub that well with a lot of traditional search firms, but I think that when you're bringing somebody on board, and these are nervous times to hire and increase your headcount, basically 60% of any search firm's outgoings are salaries, and therefore we need to draw comfort quite early on that this person is heading in the right direction. It may be a little bit slower, it may be a little bit quicker, but they are essentially a good producer for the sort of medium to longer term.
Brilliant. So let's talk about some of the steps that we've seen that people have been making over recent months. So Tom, what happens when there's a downturn?
So downturn, it's a lot of it is discretionary, low impact spend that gets cut. So advertising, excess software, non-essential expenses, travel, all that sort of thing. I think the one thing that does concern me is the non-fee earners. There has been traditionally a how can I put it, a higher burden of redundancies placed upon kind of supporting staff, albeit a kind of research, administration, operations, and so on. And that in itself, when you look at it, the staff turnover rate within the recruitment industry as a whole is some in the region of about 43% compared to, and this is in the UK, compared to a national average of about 15%. And I think, whilst I understand the principles around, keeping hold of your fee generators, because essentially we're all here to make money, there are certain other impacts you need to look at, not just from a morale, but also from an operational efficiency point of view. Interesting, when we asked the question that, what's the last thing you ditch? People did come up there in terms of they are the last to go. But one of the things I would suggest is that's slightly missing from here is actually a really good thorough look at your actual costs themselves. So, for example, if we take IT networks and so on, a typical set of Microsoft licenses will cost somebody about £10.50 per user per month. What you tend to find then is obviously there's a support package on top of that, so you need your IT support, but that's when a lot of the additional costs tend to get bundled in. And actually, when you look at it and you distill what search is about kind of relationships, search is about sales. From a technology point of view, you need a good CRM, you need a phone, you need a computer, and you need to be able to connect. And actually, a lot of those things in slightly better markets, when people are investing in their IT networks programs and so on, it tends to get kind of quite bundled on. I mean, you could realistically, do things like, I don't know, on the creative side, go to Canva, on the remote support side, go to Quick Assist, this and that sort of stuff. There's lots of things you can actually look at to, I suppose, really kind of squeeze some of the existing suppliers without actually cutting back too dramatically on other areas such as people, marketing, etc.
Can I just add to that here to the people that said the last thing you cut is your ATS and CRM systems? I think that's a very wise judgment call. I'd just like to reiterate.
Absolutely. So we've looked at what people are happy to live without. I was these are genuine results. I was surprised by what we've learned to live without non-fee earners. Yep, we can get by, but I think also, again, it comes back to that service delivery, and we're as an industry, we're getting squeezed quite heavily in terms of our worth. When you look at AI coming in, alternative recruitment methodologies, rise of in-house, etc., you're actually coring away on a key part of your service, which to a large extent, we are a service firm. So if you're coring away too hard on that, what are we actually offering? But people have learned. It's been a good 4 or 5 years of a turgid market. People have learned to adapt, and actually, one of the main things that came back from our survey about what you've missed is nothing. But that said, client interactions down, access to capital to grow, and everything else is definitely getting squeezed. And obviously, when the market picks up, Jason will be very pleased to hear this one. New technology came in as very much the #1 priority, alongside people. But the people side is still quite focused in on fee earners. Marketing spend is something people desperately want to bring back, but actually can get quite expensive. So what people other things that people have done to help navigate the ups and downs. There's a couple of pieces of advice we would give you. Jason, if you just whiz on to the next slide.
Yeah.
Sorry. So training is often something that's cut relatively early on, but actually, if you look at the makeup of a search firm, you take researchers, consultants, and operational staff. By and large, there are a lot of transferable and crossover skills within each of those 2 to 3 groups. There's sometimes a little bit of a mind block. So, for example, if you bring along your kind of research team to client meetings and so on, that's becoming very much more the norm. But actually, they are selling. It's a little bit of a mind block to them. They will engage with candidates. They will engage with clients. Very competently, very well in most instances. But actually have a little bit of a block in around. Can I actually pick up the phone and generate some new business? They've got the skills there, and with some training, they can definitely do that sort of thing. I think, as I mentioned, getting underneath the skin of what you actually need and what you're paying for from that IT example is quite key. But also, it's just making sure that you have optimal utilization. That delivery side is really 100% key, and we just need to make sure that people are fully utilized, even if that's stretching them slightly outside of their comfort zone, outside of their kind of job description, for want of a better phrase.
Brilliant. Thank you. So, sorry, Tom, please.
No, go on.
Okay, so as with all good programs, we're going to take a brief sponsor break now. Because we're running late because of my incompetence earlier, I'm going to limit it to 60 seconds. So you'll be glad to know you're not going to have to listen to an extensive sales pitch. But one of the points that came out of the research was that search firms are looking to invest in technology when they come back. Fortuitously, we have a next generation technology platform which has developed a lot over the last few years, is based around AI, and headline level gives you access to a CRM, similar candidate reach to LinkedIn Recruiter, project management work, operational work. So potentially you can take a traditional CRM, get rid of some of your LinkedIn recruitment licenses, and put them all into a single platform via Talentis. Because we're running bits late, I'm just going to show you 30 seconds of functionality. one of the biggest pains in any CRM platform is getting the data from LinkedIn to Talentis. From LinkedIn to your CRM. With Talentis, it's a single click. So if I wanted to add this guy to my database, literally all I do is click on the Talentis extension. He's now in my database. If I want to add him to an assignment, again, I can do that directly from inside LinkedIn. I can move him through the process and so on. And a single click then brings up his record. So very much quicker and easier than it is on traditional systems. You can see he's now on an assignment. I can go in and add appropriate attribute codes and so on and so forth if I wish. And we can go directly into the assignment and see immediately the state of my search and all of the different candidates who are on it and move people through the process. We also have access to Word reporting, we have Outlook add-ins and so on, and all of that's available for as little as $100 a month. We can take the data out of your legacy CRM, put it into this platform, and go forward. You'll save money, you'll be more efficient. End of sales pitch. Let's go back to the main presentation, if I can work out how the heck to do that. We'll go back to that at the end. So, yeah, Tom, we've talked a bit about various things. Let's move on to client engagement now.
Yeah, so we asked people their main kind of go-to market strategies, both on a kind of regional and search methodology take. By far and large, the most dominant is kind of LinkedIn, social media. No real surprise there at all. Networking events were very much running close behind, and in certain areas we're slightly outstripping the LinkedIn, the social media piece. Essentially, call it speed dating, call it whatever you want to call it, but networking events are very important. You actually get a very good kind of interaction with a lot of people in a short space of time. The SEO side still featured, but I would argue that the majority of search firms and their kind of websites and web presence to some extent is very much there as a confirmation or a platform for someone to check out who you are rather than lead generation. If you're more in the kind of recruitment world, that's slightly different. But essentially, we operate in a very highly competitive market. Are we likely to genuinely come up as number one on in Google, Bing, DuckDuckGo, whatever? Highly unlikely. Those places are quite definitely taken at the moment. What's interesting was the cold calling side was quite low. So looking into that, I think there is definitely an element of where do we target, how do we target. So I've seen, and it's something I've helped a number of consultants with, setting up quite targeted campaigns in terms of who to go after. How you go after them is very much your style, but if you look at simple things like you spot a C-suite move somewhere, somewhere within, for sake of argument, a large oil company, new CEO has just been hired. What you can guarantee is pretty much there'll be a 100-day lull. After that, he will be looking at his senior leadership team. Once he's fully embedded in the business, knows how it runs, there will be changes there. I think most people, get that, understand that, but a very simple tracking methodology so that if that happens in I don't know, today, by the time Easter comes around, you've probably forgotten about that. So it's literally just making sure that there is either someone in your business, i.e. your research team or your ops team or yourself, tracking that and regularly looking at that. But also, a lot of that you may consider to be quite time consuming to get. But there's such things as, or the ability to kind of combine RSS feeds. So, there's some very good, simple apps where you set up to scrape news stories on, I don't know, M&A, people moods, etc. Combine them all into one place, show them up on your teams channels on a kind of daily basis, and it's just something to see and kind of log in there and note. So yeah, the other thing people have found difficult is basically, you know, in this kind of market, how do you actually keep engaged with the clients? By and large, the preferred methodology is face-to-face, but again, it's having something to say. That is the tricky bit, but that's where search firms can do a lot more in around kind of market intelligence and surveys and so on. So at the moment, that constitutes about 12% of the shouts that people mentioned that they do. Combine that in with a newsletter, and suddenly you're getting regular thought leadership coming out. So it's looking at that. The collation of the data is surprisingly straightforward and simple. It's just understanding what's going to be of interest to your clients. So, if you're financial services, I can pretty much guarantee most of your clients will love news in around movers, bonus and pay information, and so on. And if you're able to set up, and you can certainly do it with the use of AI as well as one or two other tools, you can get a fairly good regular kind of flow of business coming in. In terms of that business, we looked at where people won their last assignments from. Suffice to say, it's repeat business and referral business that's very much dominant across all regions. And I think, hence my bit earlier about being careful on your cutting back on your delivery, for the simple fact that what you're actually doing is cutting into your service, and that's what people are buying into. And I think there are a lot of firms and a lot of things out there that are scraping away and eating into what was traditionally search work. But actually those tend to be a lot more transactional, a lot more commoditized. And so it's that service piece that's going to make you stand out. So what else? I think, for me, the only other thing that's potentially kind of missing from what people were saying was leveraging very good candidate experience. If you're if you're doing C-suite searches, you'll be talking to a number of other C-suite individuals as potential candidates. It's making sure they have the best experience possible, because even if they don't make it, a good experience with you will help with that referrals. And I think also when it comes to producing your thought leaderships and so on, it's insightful research that's important, not self-promotion. So really have a good think about what's right for your client base. And then the final question we asked was basically what was the main challenges for businesses over the next 5 years. No surprise, AI and tech disruption were huge. What I would say is we've probably all had a look at it, dabbled in it. Some of us will get a little bit more confused by it. Some of us will give up hope in it. It's evolving, so be careful, but definitely don't be late into the game. So if you look at ChatGPT 4 that came out, that was a massive leap forward, and something you need to be able to keep on top of. But most importantly, the counter to AI chewing away at our industry, in a negative way, is basically a very personalised, very consultative service, and essentially that's what search firms should be good at. So the other aspects that have been challenges are fairly normal. Traditional fee squeeze coming in at 13%. A lot of internal talent acquisition teams, and just the general malaise in around the economy, politics, and so on. But essentially, it's AI and tech disruption you need to embrace.
Brilliant. Thank you very much
Cool.
indeed, Tom. So at the end of the session, we'll go for questions now. So if you've got any questions, feel free to drop them into the question box. But at the end of the session, you'll get a pop-up, and if you'd like to talk to Tom about how you could potentially help your firm, leave your details there. If you'd like to talk to myself or one of my colleagues about how Talentis can potentially help your firm, leave your details there. Try not to get confused, because if you ask me to help you with your infrastructure or things, it won't go at all well. So make sure you tick the right box. But Tom will be happy to follow up with you about his services, and we'll be happy to follow up around Talentis. In terms of questions, if you've got any questions, feel free to pop them into the question box. I can see that we've got a couple come in. Bear with me 1 second. Let me just move this around so I can actually see them. We've talked a bit about the short-term future and people's views of the future. Talk to us about sort of longer term. So 5 years down the track, what are search firms going to be doing well, would you say?
So I think, I think, very, very broadly, the successful firms will be the ones that have taken their niches, broaden those into adjacent areas. So if you look at, in its most simplistic term, we all kind of know what fintech is. Fintech is an amalgamation of financial services and technology. It's an absolute classic area where you are bringing in to meet clients' kind of diversifying needs and so on. I think it's also firms that have taken some risk as far as their hiring goes. There'll be a lot of firms that will be out there going gangbusters, and it's either going to work or it's not going to work. But I think it's one of those ones where if we're kind of 50-50 on do we make the hire or not, you've got to remember that buzz in the office, albeit a virtual office with new colleagues coming on board. There's a morale effect, and I would urge people to take that chance. Give somebody the benefit of the doubt. If you're using good KPIs and everything else, you'll be able to work with them, train them, and bring them up to speed. And I think the other thing that will have defined the successful search firms in 5 years' time is it's those with a much more consultative approach. They're putting some distance between the kind of decapicated search and covering a lot more of the things that AI can't do.
Thank you. I've had a few people comment about the audio, the connection, and so on and so forth. And again, I apologise for the issues up front, particularly, which I think were primarily at my end. But you will receive a copy of the session. You will receive the recording to watch on at your convenience, and hopefully that will have better sound, even if you fast forward past my random panic attacks at the beginning. Question. A couple of other questions we've got. Tom, this is one that's probably going to. What are you seeing about fees? What's happening with fees in your experience, Tom? Is it percentages still? Is it fixed fee? Is it more of a broken down fee? Are you seeing anything particular happening there?
There's definite squeeze on fees. That's for certain. The typical third is getting hard to do. But certainly those. Well, when you go back to the last financial crash back in 2008, we saw a world where some search firms very much hung on to their fees, toughed it out, and have been able to retain that. It's very difficult to upgrade your operating model back up to what it was once you've already shown that you're open to negotiate. But I've certainly seen quite a few smart moves that have come in there from individuals. So the likes of assumptive selling. So if we look at different bolt-on services that typically you would try to weave into a search, so leadership and development assessments, this and that sort of thing. An assumptive sale works very well on the basis that, look, this is our service, we do this naturally, this is all baked into the cost, and so on, rather than asking for additional money to cover that as a service. That way, from a psychological point of view, you're selling a better service. It's at a slightly higher price, but you can still drop back down on certain areas. It's leaving yourself room to negotiate. But fees are tough, and the only way, in my mind, that you can compete against the kind of quasi search, the cut down versions, is to provide a really tip top excellent service.
Thank you. I think we are going to have to draw a line there. We have overrun slightly, and again, I apologise for the issues we had at the top of the presentation. I'm sure, and speaking for him, maybe feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on this, Tom, but I'm sure you'll be happy to engage with people through LinkedIn or email if they have follow-up questions for you. But as I say, at the end of the session, you'll all get a pop-up, and you can click that if you want to talk to Tom about his services, or you'd like to talk to us about Talentis. But all that remains is for me to say to everybody who joined us, thank you very much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate your engagement. Thank you for giving up your time. And I hope 2025 is a really good year for you. And Tom, as always, thank you very much for giving up your time. I know, looking at some of the comments coming in, I'm not going to boost your ego too much by reading them out, but people have found your insights helpful. So thank you very much indeed for your time and sharing so kindly. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Bye-bye.